Please all arise. ਬੋਲਣਾ ਜੀ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ 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 ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ। ਇੱਕ ਓੰਕਾਰ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਸ੍ਰੀ ਭਗਵਤੀ ਜੀ ਸਹਾਏ ਵਾਰ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਭਗਵਤੀ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ 10ਵੀਂ। ਪ੍ਰਥਮ ਭਗਵਤੀ ਸਿਮਰ ਕੈ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਲਈ ਧਿਆਏ, ਫਿਰ ਅੰਗਦ ਗੁਰ ਤੇ ਅਮਰਦਾਸ ਰਾਮਦਾਸ ਹੋਈ ਸਹਾਏ। ਅਰਜਨ ਹਰਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਨੋ ਸਿਮਰਉ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਹਰਿ ਰਾਏ। ਸ੍ਰੀ ਹਰਿਕ੍ਰਿਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਡਿਠੇ ਸਭ ਦੁਖ ਜਾਏ। ਤੇਗ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਸਿਮਰਿਆ ਘਰ ਨੌ ਦੇ ਆਵੇ ਧਾਏ। ਸਭ ਥਾਈ ਹੋਏ ਸਹਾਏ। ਦਸਵਾਂ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਸਭ ਥਾਈ ਹੋਏ ਸਹਾਏ। ਦਸਾਂ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਆਤਮਿਕ ਸਰੂਪ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਪਾਠ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਦੀਦਾਰ ਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਧਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਬੋਲਣਾ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ, ਬੋਲਣਾ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ। ਪੰਜ ਪਿਆਰੇ, ਚਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬਜ਼ਾਦੇ, 40 ਮੁਕਤੇ, ਹਠੀਆਂ ਜਪੀਆਂ ਤਪੀਆਂ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਤੇਰਾ ਨਾਮ ਜਪਿਆ ਵੰਡ ਛਕਿਆ। ਦੇਖ ਚਲਾਈ ਤੇ ਗਵਾਹੀ ਦੇਖ ਕੇ ਅੰਡਿਠ ਕੀਤਾ, ਤਿਨਾਂ ਪਿਆਰਿਆਂ ਸੱਚਿਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਕਮਾਈ ਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਧਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਬੋਲਣਾ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ। ਨਿਮਾਣਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਮਾਨ, ਨਿਤਾਨਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਤਾਨ, ਨਿਉਟਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਓਟ, ਨੇ ਆਸਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਆਸਰੇ। ਪਿਤਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ ਕਮਲ ਚ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਹਜ਼ੂਰ ਈਲਿੰਗ ਬੋਰੰਗ ਬੋਰੋ ਆਲ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਜੋ ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਮਯਾਬੀਆਂ ਬਖਸ਼ਣੀਆਂ, ਆਪਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਤਫਾਕ ਮੇਲ ਮਿਲਾਪ, ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀਆਂ ਕਲਾਂ ਬਖਸ਼ਣੀਆਂ। ਅਤੇ ਜੋ ਨਵਾਂ ਸਾਲ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੁਬਾਰਕ ਹੋਵੇ ਤੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰੇ, ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਮਯਾਬੀਆਂ ਬਖਸ਼ੇ। ਆਪਣੇ ਟਾਰਗੇਟ ਨੂੰ, ਆਪਣੇ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਕਰਨੇ ਹਨ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਾਮਯਾਬੀਆਂ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀਆਂ ਕਲਾਂ ਬਖਸ਼ੇ। ਗੁਰੂ ਆਪ ਸਹਾਈ ਹੋਵੇ, ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਨਾਮ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ, ਤੇਰੇ ਭਾਣੇ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਮੈਂ ਦਾਸ ਹਰਬੰਸ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਮਾਲਕ ਦੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੀਬੀ ਮਹਿੰਦਰ ਕੌਰ ਮਿੱਢਾ ਮੇਅਰ ਈਲਿੰਗ ਬੋਰੋ ਤੇ ਆਪ ਸਾਰਾ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਰ ਹਨ, ਜੋ ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਇਹ 'ਚ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਾਮਯਾਬੀਆਂ ਬਖਸ਼ੇ, ਆਪਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਤਫਾਕ ਮੇਲ ਮਿਲਾਪ ਬਖਸ਼ੇ। ਤੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਭੈਣ ਜੀ ਬੀਬੀ ਮਹਿੰਦਰ ਕੌਰ ਜੀ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 12 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਰ ਹਨ, 40 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਰੇਡੀਓ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਇਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਆਪ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਿਣ, ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਿਣ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀਆਂ ਕਲਾਂ ਬਖਸ਼ੇ। ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਮਾਪਤੀ ਕਰਦਾ, ਇੱਕ ਜਕਾਰਾ ਛੱਡਾਂਗਾ ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇਣਾ। ਬੋਲੇ ਸੋ ਨਿਹਾਲ, ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਗਿਆਨ ਜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ। ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ ਫॉर ਕਮਿੰਗ। Tonight's meeting will be broadcast live and a recording retained on the Council YouTube site. Therefore, I will presume everyone consent to this happening. If you do not consent to this, then you should leave the meeting. There are a number of councillors who will be joining us remotely tonight by Zoom. These members will not be counted as formally in the attendance at the meeting. For the purpose of the Section 85 of the Local Government Act 1972. However, their virtual attendance will be recorded in the minutes under item 1. The members in attendance virtually will be able to speak at the meeting, but won't be able to take part in the votes. Are there any apologies for the absence?
Yes, Madam Mayor. We've had apologies from councillors D. Crawford, Alexander, Iqbal, Shabazz Ahmed, Murtaza, Khan, Kim Nagpal and Taylor. And we've had apologies for lateness from councillors Young and Conti.
Madam Mayor, if I may just add apologies from Councillor D. Martin as well.
Can the clerks read out the names of those members who are in the attendance virtually, please?
Yeah, I've got Councillor Baines, Summers, Nijar, and Councillor D. Martin.
Yes, sir. Are there any declaration of pecuniary interest?
Yes, I'd like to declare a non-pecuniary interest on item 10 that I do live in a housing association apartment.
Thank you. No dispensations are required, so I will move on to the next item of business. Are the minutes of the meeting held on 1st of November 2022 agreed as a correct record of proceedings? Thank you. The next is mayor announcements. It's quite a good news today announcements. I would like to congratulate Councillor Sohota on the naming of our baby boy, Amrinder Singh, born on 17th October. Congratulations. I would like to wish both Councillor Daniel Crawford and Councillor Amarjit Jammu happy birthday to you. The third one is, with Christmas approaching, I have attended many Christmas lightings events and Christmas concerts. It was a real joy to help decorate the Christmas tree at Southall Town Hall last Friday. Well done. All the councillors and community member was there. Well done. Martin, where's Martin? John Martin is not here today. Yes. Well done. Well done. You was not feeling well, still was there. I met you. Thank you. Please save the date for my New Year fundraising at the Royal Nawab on 20th January. The mayor office will be circulating further details soon. Don't forget this date, forgot everything. Don't forget this date, please. Everybody's comes. I hope some of you are able to celebrate Guru Nanak's birthday in November. Finally, with only a couple of weeks away, I wish you all the happy Christmas and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. There are any petition from the members of the public tonight? No. Are there any petition from members of the council?
I have a petition. Thank you.
There are no questions from member of the public tonight.
Madam Mayor, could we know what the petition is regarding?
Madam, you're happy for me to read it out, Councillor Malcolm? It's a petition for Ealing Council to resurface Temple Road. We, the aforementioned residents, call upon Ealing Council to resurface Temple Road to make it safer for all road vehicles and users to travel on. I assume Temple Road is in Southfield Ward. Apologies, Madam Mayor, I've just realised there's a second bit. We also respectfully request that the pavements are repaired and replaced as they've become a hazard to older people, children on bikes and people with child buggies. Sorry, it was further down.
Does anyone from the Labour group have a supplementary questions? Is that the side? Yes, there are no questions from the member of the public tonight. Question from the member of the council. I will call. Hi, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I ask the portfolio holder to outline how the draft local plan, which is out for consultation at the moment, will help to meet our manifesto and council plan commitments?
And thank you, Councillor Tai. This is a really important part of local government business. Local plan went out for consultation on the 30th of November. It's called Regulation 18. The mission of Ealing's new administration is simple. We want to ensure every family has a decent living income and can live in a genuinely affordable home, that everyone can live a long, happy and healthy life in communities full of pride and identity, where every child can reach their potential and achieve their dreams. This is why our council plan has 3 cross-cutting core themes: tackling the climate crisis, fighting inequality, and creating good jobs and growth. Our draft local plan, currently out to consultation with residents and stakeholders, is just one mechanism to realizing these bold ambitions, but our core values are reinforced throughout the document. It provides a platform enabling a new conversation with our communities on how our towns and neighborhoods and their local economies grow and evolve. It's also a key tool in addressing the many challenges we face as a borough, as well as unlocking its many opportunities. Consequently, it must be underpinned by a strong set of values and those in the council plan that are well understood and relevant to everyday lives of our residents, businesses, and those who visit the borough to study, work, or socialize. Practically, the spatial strategy of the draft new local plan, which is outlined in chapter 3 of the document, demonstrates how the 9 priorities of the council plan are integrated within the 4 strategic policies. Ultimately, the local plan will help inform and shape decisions taken by the council, developers, landowners, and others about new homes, infrastructure, tackling climate change, creating good jobs, and how we address health and inequalities in Ealing. The local plan, like our council plan, belongs to everyone and will help shape Ealing for the better over the next 15 years.
Councillor Manro, thank you. Does anyone from the Labour group have a supplementary questions?
Can the portfolio holder explain how local people will be engaged and consulted during the local plan process?
Councillor Brett, it's our belief that everyone can and should have a say in how Ealing grows and develops over the next 15 years. So we're using a range of different approaches to make sure that everyone can be involved and engaged in shaping the borough for the future. There has already been extensive consultation with residents and stakeholders about all aspects of the local plan, and this will continue over the coming months. This engagement process started with the launch of Shaping Ealing, one of Ealing's biggest ever listening consultations. We received over 10,600 responses from residents across 7 towns who told us what they loved about Ealing, what they didn't love so much, and where we could do better. Following on from this, we have also recently just launched our Regulation 18 consultation process for the local plan, which is an extended 8-week consultation that goes above and beyond the statutory consultation requirement of 6 weeks. This will provide an opportunity to collect free feedback from local people and stakeholders and will form an integral part of how we shape the local plan. Alongside this, a second Regulation 18 consultation will take place in February March 23 to focus on specific and potentially contentious evidence-based documents. Our consultation process has 4 main components designed to allow as many people across Ealing as possible to give their feedback easily. We've launched online surveys in our 9 community languages and hosting a series of public meetings and events across the 7 towns. This is alongside business engagement events and other specific stakeholder and interest group events. As a key part of our manifesto and council plan, we want to make sure that we get the right and make sure that our plans for the future are reflective of what local people want. This is why we're working with our community engagement team to make sure that as many people across the borough can have their say on how we make Ealing a better place to live and work. And I hope every person in this room also takes part in that engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ball to Councillors Costigan, please.
Thank you. Can the portfolio holder please outline proposals for the pedestrianisation of Bond Street, High Street and/or Springbridge Road and advise what consultation and feasibility work has taken place on them so far?
I would say thank you, Councillor Ball, except it's a bit of an odd question. There's no plans for pedestrianisation of Bond Street, High Street or Springbridge Road, and therefore we haven't done any work on it. And I think you would probably know this for the reasons I'm about to outline. So I think there has been a report that appeared in a couple of local websites which discussed a recent meeting of the Local Development Plan Advisory Committee. And there was a report at this committee on the local plan, which we've just heard Councillor Munro outline, on what's called a transport topic paper. And I guess a topic paper is sort of like a blue sky thinking thing. You know, what kind of things do we need to think about in the future when we're looking at 20 years' time and where the borough might be? Unfortunately, the website report seems to have misunderstood what the meeting was talking about and ignored the subsequent discussion. It took a passing reference to what was an old idea, which is no longer policy, as something that was still on the table. And in fact, Councillor Ball would know this because indeed he was at the meeting. So I don't know why he's asking the question. So the transport topic paper, which, as I said, is a lot of different ideas that people might look at. It includes the section heading pedestrianisation of high streets as a heading for potential transport interventions in the future. Councillor Ball will recall that this was one potential transport intervention discussed out of many options, including traffic calming, reducing the number of lanes, widening pavements, timed restrictions, restrictions on general traffic, bus and taxi only routes, and full pedestrianisation. These were unfortunately not included in the media report either. So I think that this idea came from an old bid that was submitted in the previous council term to Transport for London for a livable neighbourhood for Ealing Town Centre. And if you recall, we submitted a bid for West Ealing Town Centre and another for Ealing Broadway Town Centre. And this contained an objective to look at improving pedestrian facilities in Ealing Town Centre. But actually, we didn't go any further with that bid, but we won the bid for West Ealing. And that's a completely different bid and nothing to do with that. So the Ealing Central one is off the table. It's not in any of our plans. It wasn't in our manifesto. It's not something that TfL has ever agreed to either. And it's not something that was discussed at the meeting, as you know, because you were at it. You will know, of course, that we have now consulted on our Travel in Ealing Charter in the borough. And that means that actually what we do now is we go to local people and we ask them for their ideas and what their issues are in the local area. And we work with them to co-produce schemes and interventions that will make a difference to air quality and to travel in our borough. We don't just come up with ideas out of thin air. We work with local people through the Travel in Ealing Charter. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone from the Liberal Democrats group have a supplementary question? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, thank you for that reassurance. I was indeed at the meeting because it was actually me that asked the question. It was wrongly attributed to Councillor Wall. But the council's consultant didn't know whether it was a current scheme or an old scheme, so that's why I asked now. But could the portfolio holder clarify, if there's no plan to do this, why have businesses on Bond Street been consulted on pedestrianising their street?
I'm not aware of that they have. If you've got any evidence of this, please let me know. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bob. Councillor Glenn to Councillor Radha, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the rising cost of energy due to the war in Ukraine, will the council not follow the example of numerous other local authorities and augment the monthly grant payments to Ealing families that continue to host Ukrainians on the Homes for Ukraine scheme?
Thank you. Here in Ealing, we have a long and proud history of supporting refugees, and to date, we have welcomed 400 guests to under our Homes for Ukraine scheme and given hosts £297,000 in thank you payments. As you will be well aware, Councillor Gallant, the support offered to Ukrainian families under the government's Home for Ukraine scheme was at best underwhelming. Under the so-called phased approach, we saw the website crash within a matter of minutes. Ukrainian families were bogged down with a 20-page application. And in a sea of bureaucracy, it wasn't exactly the easiest process to go through. The scheme offered no plan B for their refugees if the accommodation arrangements fell apart, and the scheme gave no security or certainty for the future after those initial 6 months. So I must say, Madam Mayor, that this evening, Councillor Gallant would ask such a question that implies that Ealing Labour does not support Ukrainian refugees adequately when his own party have failed to support them, failed to support their hosts and their families all across the country and in a very Tory-made cost of living crisis. To directly support hosts for Ukrainians, this October, we put in place an uplift in support we provide to our hosts so that they can continue to keep their guests in safe accommodation, help them to face the cost of living and this energy crisis that we're facing at the moment. If a host has one refugee, they will receive an additional £50 extra per month on top of their £350 monthly thank you payment. And if they have 2 refugees, they will get an extra £150 a month. And for every additional person hosted, an extra £100 will be given to the host. As home to the second largest Ukrainian population in London, we are more than willing to play our part and to offer more than just words of encouragement. These payments will be delivered to host households in the next month and are part of our commitment to support refugees, our kind residents who house them, and people everywhere, that Ealing is a very welcoming place for everybody.
Does anyone from the Conservative group have a supplementary question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that answer. And thanks for the second half of the answer, reminding the portfolio holder that we're talking about people who are fleeing war and about hosting families, fantastic families in Ealing who've hosted them for several months now. And I think we all owe them a real debt of gratitude for that. Does the portfolio holder not agree that an uplift in payments to hosting families represents considerably better value for money than hotel B&B or emergency accommodation that the council would otherwise have to provide for Ukrainian guests?
Well, I think if we didn't have such an ill thought out plan to start off with, Councillor Gallant, we might not be in this position where we have to host people in B&Bs in really bad conditions. So I would ask you to perhaps get behind a campaign to make sure that your government does a bit more about it rather than give us just talk and cuddly words and platitudes and all sorts of fluffy comforts, because what we really need in local government is cash to help these families help their friends.
Thank you. Councillor Kingston to Councillor Danley, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can the portfolio holder outline what the government's autumn statement means for Londoners and local government?
Thank you, Councillor Kingston. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Unfortunately, and yet unsurprisingly, the government's autumn statement will make things worse for many Londoners, and it's certainly not made things better for local government. In fact, since I prepared my thoughts on this, I was reading today a latest thing from the Local Government Chronicle, who's took a view on the autumn statement and the policy position outlined yesterday, and I summarised one or two things it said about it. Some people may believe it more than me. It looks like the government has done just enough to stave off widespread disaster, but is unwilling or unable to address the long-term challenges. The fact that the government has needed to publish this unusual policy statement in the first place is indicative of a government that is wading through treacle. And I think that's something all of us here recognise. While the allocations for individual boroughs won't be known until the provisional local government settlement that's expected next week, I think the 21st of December, we're due it, lovely Christmas present. The autumn statement confirmed council budgets will be maintained in line with the budget set out at the spending review in 2022. That means a real terms cuts in funding for councils, with inflation running at 11.1%. And if I've returned to my new good friends in the Local Government Chronicle, they say with inflation running around 10%, it doesn't need a mathematician to figure out that raising council tax by 5% this year and next year will leave a significant gap. Well, hear to that. And the subtext is clear. The government expects councils to make efficiencies to manage inflationary pressures. Well, after 12 years of Tory rule, having budget slashed is becoming the norm. And the autumn statement could have been an opportunity for government to work in partnership with us to tackle the serious challenges that we face as a city. For instance, the government did provide more desperately needed funding to the NHS, but it was not matched with more funding for public health budgets in councils. And surely the last 2 or 3 years have taught us that councils are key in public health and inequality challenges. And it seems like a real oversight or a punishment not to provide councils with the resource that we need to support the NHS, because we know ambulances are stacked up outside hospitals because patients can't get out of the hospital because there's nowhere for them to be discharged to. There was an announcement on funding for social care, but only in the context of the government deferring its long trumpeted plans to introduce a wholesale new social care policy. So we are all left yet again in uncertainty. As the Local Government Chronicle said, the government's paper did not seem to recognise that social care needs fundamental reform from the centre. So we've proved, as local councils London, we are the fabric of the country. And in Ealing, we're doing everything we can to continue to deliver for our residents who need our services more than ever. London faces enormous challenges, of course it does, and councils are key to responding to those. And it's deeply disappointing the government chooses to punish us instead of working together in what's one of the toughest climates in the memory of anyone alive today.
Thank you. Does anyone from the Labour group have supplementary questions?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can the portfolio holder explain how is Ealing supporting the voluntary sector during the inflation and the cost of living crisis?
I certainly can. Thank you, Councillor Bucklini. At Ealing Council, we recognise the crucial importance of the voluntary sector during challenging times like these. And as the public service continues to be decimated by austerity, we know more and more services Londoners rely on are being provided by the voluntary and community sector, who are also being asked to deliver more with less. And that's why I'm delighted that at Cabinet last week, we agreed an inflationary uplift of 5% to the Council's contribution to our voluntary and community service sector budget. That's an increase of £78,600 for the first year, with a commitment to review annually. Recognising we need to work together as a community in the fact of the significant challenges that face our borough and the crucial importance of the voluntary sector in delivering the core objectives of creating good jobs, tackling the climate crisis and fighting inequality, we want to do our bit to help build the voluntary sector's capacity and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Milton to Councillors Costigan, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Richmond Council is participating in a trial of flood sensors which are placed in 12 gullies across Richmond, allowing officers to monitor rising water levels and alert the borough's drainage contractors to respond quickly to any surface water flooding. Can the portfolio holder update us on what Ealing Council is doing on that aspect?
Thank you, Councillor Malcolm, for your question, although I do note that there's a bit of a pattern with the Lib Dems where you prefer to ask about what other boroughs are doing rather than focus on the great work that we're doing here in Ealing. We're actually running our own trial on a risk-based approach to monitoring and maintaining our gullies in the borough. And the objective of the trial is to develop a more targeted approach to gully cleansing that delivers appropriate and sustainable service levels, as well as building a forward plan and an annual programme of maintenance and replacement based on a hierarchy of risk. We're also now planning to work with the management of the Metropolitan Business Park in Greenford to deploy flood sensors there. So we are using sensors. These will be connected radar-based depth sensors, which will help us to actually look at the flooding levels in that area. And there is a particular sewer capacity issues and a risk of flooding there. But I'm really delighted actually that Councillor Malcolm has asked me the question and allowed me to talk about flooding, as I've recently been appointed as one of 5 councillors to the brand new Pan-London Surface Water Strategic Group, which covers all of London. I note a couple of sniggers. I think it's maybe not everyone's idea of the acme of their political career, but I have to assure you, I'm really excited about being involved in this. The group's been established to cover the 32 London boroughs because it's recognised that there's actually no simple answer to the issue of surface water flooding that we've seen across London in recent years. And, you know, yes, as councils, we need to make sure that we keep the gullies clear, and we have a regular leaf clearing programme, and you'll have all have seen our leaf clearers out over the last couple of months. And in Ealing, we inspect our gullies on an annual basis and we clean any blockages. We've got 27,000 gullies in Ealing, so it's quite a big piece of work that we have to do. But we also undertake reactive repairs, and when we receive intelligence that heavy rain is about to fall, we actually go out and do additional manual checks to areas that are prone to surface water flooding. But keeping the gullies clear is not sufficient. Gullies take rainwater into the drain and through the sewage system in London, and this is operated by Thames Water. These drains, they were actually built by the Victorians, and although they are a triumph of engineering, they were never built for a city the size of London with 10 million people and with so much more concrete and so few grassed gardens compared to back in the 1800s. So they just don't have the capacity these days for the amount of rainfall that we're now seeing in London. And so the answer isn't just one thing. We can't expand those drains. There doesn't seem to be the funding there to do it. So we need to look at other alternatives. And one of the alternatives is mitigating the risk of flooding. And that's through nature-based solutions, such as what's known as SUDS, or sustainable urban drainage systems. And this includes ideas such as rain gardens that soak up rainwater, or seasonal pools that fill up in heavy rain. Now, the government's own National Infrastructure Commission produced a report on surface water flooding just 2 weeks ago, and they called for a £12 billion investment in flooding works in order to avoid flood risk to 65,000 properties. And it's important that the government accepts the recommendations of this report. But of course, there's been no response from the Conservative government as yet, no surprise there. However, in Ealing, we are investing in managing flood risk. Officers continuously work to identify high-risk flooding locations, and we use a combination of our flood studies and our own knowledge of historical flooding sites. And we have delivered already a number of SUDS schemes, including North Acton Square, at Greenford to Gurnell Greenway, and also at Hanwell Station and Acton Mainline Station. And we have a programme of delivering even more SUDS schemes in the future. And this includes at Dean's Gardens, Barron's Pond, Bellevue Park in my own ward, and Glade Lane. Over the coming months. So as I said, there's no easy answer to surface water flooding because it's caused by a combination of issues, including urbanisation and climate change. And in Ealing, we recognise this, and that's why we continue to take a broad range of actions to combat climate change and adapt where we need to. Thanks.
Very good. Does anyone from the Liberal Democrats group have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I thank the portfolio holder for detailed comments and the news of your new role. On flooding, my example, when I visited in one weekend when it was rainy, Southall, Ealing, Chiswick and Acton, there were many gullies and drains that were blocked with compacted leaves. Even one business owner in my area took it upon himself to do something the council should have done, which was not particularly good news for him. So will you guarantee by the end of the month that every street will be leaf-free, every gully and drain can be cleared to reduce the future flooding? That is something that we can do. Will you guarantee that?
I'm not sure whether to say thank you, Councillor, for the question, but, you know, I'll go for it. Thank you, Councillor, for the supplementary question. I'm not sure if you listened to my answer. And perhaps this is a general failing in the Liberal Democrat group, that you're at meetings where you don't hear what was just said to you. But I just explained to you that the reason for flooding across London is multifaceted. And that is the reason that we've established a pan-London strategic group on surface water flooding. Now, amazingly, there is not currently a cross-London approach to surface water flooding. This is something that we're all dealing with on our own as separate boroughs, and we're doing everything we can to keep leaves clear and to keep the gullies clear. But in fact, that is not the source of the problem. If you wait 2 or 3 hours for a surface water flooding incident, the waters normally recede. And the reason for that is because it is the capacity of the sewage that is the key issue. And that's why nature-based responses are really the best approach if we can't get the funding from government and water companies to basically redo our sewage structure under London. But I'm very excited, as I say, about answering the question in the first place, because it's my favourite topic, but also about the work we're doing on a London level, because what we're going to do is we're commissioning consultants to look at London across the board and come up with a strategy for the whole of the capital, so that we can focus not just on getting the government to put more funding into this area, but also how we look at SUDS flood schemes on a more strategic basis, and how we work with residents to explain to them the reasons for flooding, and that in the future we may need to look at this differently. We may need to look at this as an area for mitigation and adaptation. So we will need to ensure that everyone's aware when a flooding event is about to happen, and the residents are able to take action as well as the council taking action, because this is a long-term problem. And I'm afraid with climate change and with the government currently unwilling to take the steps that are required to bring us to net zero, we are only going to see incidents of flooding increase. And the answer to that, if we can't get government action, is nature-based approaches. And we will continue to do that on a London-wide level and in Ealing.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon to Councillor Kamaljeet Kaur Nagpal, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can the portfolio holder update members on the outcome of the recent Ofsted inspection on Ealing's Children's Services?
I would be delighted to, Madam Mayor. In October, we received a 2-day focus visit from Ofsted, which looked at our front door arrangements, which is the point where local authorities alongside other agencies consider and respond to referrals relating to children who may be in need or at risk of harm. I am pleased to update you that the council's hard work, perseverance and dedication have not gone unnoticed. We have been credited for an improved service that provides good quality, a clear focus, timely responses to referrals, and a well-developed response to support the most vulnerable families and young people in our borough. Our comprehensive early help offer was singled out for providing children and families with access to a range of targeted and accessible services, alongside tailoring our approach according to the unique identity and cultural needs of our children and families. The level of intervention we provide were deemed appropriate and well embedded in practice, so much so that when immediate risks to children are identified, the response is swift and effective. The support offered to children with health conditions or impairments was recognised as detailed and thorough, as we include both their needs with the impact of their relationships with their immediate family as part of our wraparound support. Our schools were also in praise of our service, stating that the service has helped them to bring stronger relationships with parents, and it has enabled them to work together to support their children, which is fantastic. I am delighted that the hard work, dedication, and vital service that we provide in supporting our most vulnerable young people and their families during sensitive and challenging times has been recognised by Ofsted. This Labour Council works tirelessly to offer wraparound support to those who need it. Our service, as the inspector said, has improved significantly, but we are not taking our foot off the pedal, Madam Mayor. Not until every young person in Ealing has the chance to reach their full potential. We will continue to work with them, for them.
Thank you, Kamaljeet. Does anyone from the Labour group have a supplementary question?
What support did the government give for schools in the recent autumn statement?
I'm sure I speak for most here in the chamber this evening, Madam Mayor, when I say that I was glad to see the Tories even mention schools in the autumn statement. Mr. Hunt's extra 2.3 billion into the education budget is simply not good enough and holds little meaningful impact in supporting our schools. The so-called thank you investment to school staff for their brilliant work is entirely tokenistic and does not go far enough in offering true, tangible and meaningful change to our schools. To begin, the extra 2.3 billion does not come close to covering the rate of inflation that the country is facing, especially when it is estimated that school costs will grow by 20% in the coming years. The lion's share of the additional money will be spent on heating schools, keeping the doors open for 5 days a week, and retaining teachers as best as they can, as the government continue to refuse to pay for their salaries, but instead place the onus on schools. Head teachers are already at breaking point over budgetary fears, over not being able to buy textbooks, keep their teachers, and provide sufficient provision for SEND education, which disgracefully only accounted for 20% of the additional funding. Early years funding too was altogether missing from the Tory statement once again, and it is feared that the sector will see an 8% drop in real terms funding over the next 3 years, which would be devastating. Madam Mayor, I ask you, if the Chancellor is to be pro-education as he self-proclaims, then why has he enforced a statement that exasperates the staffing crisis, that neglects early years, and that altogether fails our children and young people? Our young people have so much potential, but right now they are blighted by Tory-made crisis after crisis. I call on the people of Ealing to ask themselves, am I and my family really better off with the Tories? The answer, Madam Mayor, would be a resounding no. The crises we face are direct Tory failures. Time and time again, they neglect education and our schools, and this is not good enough. Our schools need support. Our young people deserve it, and it's about time a Labour government stepped in to provide it.
Thanks. Councillor Ashani to Councillor Mahfouz, please.
Thank you. Can I please ask the portfolio holder to give us an update on the commitment to provide 10,000 new jobs? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hashani. As you know, we set ourselves an ambitious target to secure and deliver 10,000 good new jobs to people here in our borough. We were very clear in our commitment that we want to support local businesses, address the obstacles for residents in securing good work, and support people into jobs that provided a decent living income. And I'm so proud of the work that we have already achieved just a few months in. To date, we have already delivered 6 jobs fairs, engaging over 1,200 residents this year. And thank you to the councillors who came to the last jobs fair that we had down the road at University of West London. We've provided 55 apprenticeships, as well as expanding our youth offer to support people into employment, education, or training. We've launched our creative enterprise zone in Park Royal and the Forge that will further support people into work. We've delivered over 1,500 new qualifications and training programs for people looking to upskill. We've launched new learning zones at community hubs in Northolt and this week coming to Southall. And we're also delivering our digital inclusion project to 240 unemployed residents to help them into work. And as of September, so only 6 months in, we've already got 1,100 of our residents into new jobs. That's over 1,000 residents who've been supported, listened to, and have changed their lives thanks to having a Labour council elected in May of this year. But the figure that I'm going to, I think, probably most proud of is the one that we've done where we have supported those who have got the toughest barriers to employment to get them into work. This year, we said we were going to support 500 of those such people. And so far, in the first 6 months, we've already supported 463. Sorry, you can clap. That's fine. But I'll give you an example because they're not just a number. We had a care leaver from Ealing who studied at Birmingham University. They wanted to find a placement or internship that would support their career in finance, but faced barrier after barrier. So we supported him with one of our youth advisors who got them a job at a local coffee shop as they were looking for a placement. They helped them develop their CV, forwarded them a range of opportunities, and then got them an interview with the Crown Estate. Their interview, following dedicated support, preparation, and practice from the youth advisor, was, I'm delighted to say, a resounding success. And the care leaver received a contract with the Crown Estate and will go on to achieve amazing things. So stories like this, Madam Mayor, are why Ealing Labour was elected for a 4th term with its largest mandate. And stories like this show the importance of working with residents. Stories like this show how much Ealing Labour cares and how dedicated we truly are in supporting our residents.
Thank you, Mahfouz. I have seen the events that the ladies are learning from the evening classes. They start the work on the hospitals. It's amazing that events. They are ladies, they are telling their own language. They said we learn from the Chinese, this and that. It really is amazing, that program. Thank you. Thank you.
The Mayor, I'm most grateful. Can the portfolio holder comment on the government's plan to support workers given the projected rise in rates of unemployment, estimated to hit 4.9% in 2024, as the Chancellor claimed?
I've got to congratulate Councillor Kwanzaa on being able to hold a straight face while saying the words government and plan together in the same sentence. You know, I admire the optimism, but imagining that this government has any sort of plan whatsoever, whether it's about workers, schools, NHS, or even who's leading them, is quite frankly living in dreamland. In reality, what the statement showed us is that the Conservatives and this government have absolutely no regard for anyone except for themselves, and of course their millionaire mates who get all the contracts. But look, you know, we heard Mr. Hunt say that unemployment was to rise from 3.6% today to 4.9% in 2024 before falling again to 4.1%. I've got to ask, in all seriousness, how can somebody claim to have a plan to tackle unemployment when they are standing there saying that unemployment will continue to rise to those levels? Put simply, the Tories have no plan to fix the workforce crisis or grow our economy, with the OBR predicting that unemployment will still be higher in 2027 than it is today. For too long, we've suffered under the Tories. For countless administrations, we've seen the party cause dramatic spikes in unemployment and force people into poor, unstable, zero-hour contract roles, making them accept almost any job vacancy, as if years of benefit cuts, freezes and sanctions hadn't already reduced these people unable to work or struggling to find it too deep enough levels of despair and destitution. Time and time again, they have been let down by this Tory government, and it's costing taxpayers an extra £7.5 billion a year on average over the next 4 years. For all their talk of levelling up, all they seem capable of is increasing unemployment, crashing the pound, and creating crisis after crisis. I know he doesn't like to hear it, but sadly, the people out there, real people are absolutely seething at the No, you don't want to hear it, do you? Because sadly, talk to real people out there, they are absolutely seething about the situation they're in. They are worried. They are genuinely worried, day in, day out. They might be in a job, but they don't know whether that job is going to still be there tomorrow. And that insecurity drives worry, drives concern whether they can pay those bills. And that's what one of the huge challenges is. So we're not talking about just jobs, we're talking about decent living income jobs, and that's what we're here to deliver. This what we see today. This what we see today is it's a mess, the direct result of 12 years of Tory economic failure. Unlike this government, Labour has a long-term plan powered by talent and the efforts of millions of working people and thousands of businesses. Labour will create jobs across the country. We will fix we'll fix business rates so our high streets can thrive again, and we'll put skills at the heart of our plan for growth. It's time, colleagues, to have a plan. It's time for action. It's time for a Labour government.
Thank you, members. Opposition group motion for debate. I call Councillor Wall to move the opposition motion for debate, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I rise today to express my concern about the failings of housing associations in Ealing. The housing crisis in our city has reached a breaking point, with thousands of people struggling to find affordable and safe places to live. One of the main weapons in fighting this crisis should be the housing association sector, as they manage an ever-increasing proportion of housing stock and need to provide adequate housing for those in need. Despite receiving significant public funding, many of these organisations are failing to address the housing needs of our community. Many housing association tenants feel that their concerns are ignored and see repairs taking an unacceptably long time. Leaks, mold, unsafe security doors, even broken lifts. All of these take too long to fix and leave residents in a dangerous situation. In too many cases, the new schemes housing associations build are a mix of luxury flats and affordable tenures that is indistinguishable from what a private developer would build. It saddens me whenever a housing association comes to planning committee with a small affordable percentage. In terms of management, there are good housing associations, but the worst can be problem landlords for their vulnerable tenants, slow at repairs, bad at dealing with ASB, unaccountable and out of touch. This is unacceptable. Housing is a fundamental human right, and it is the responsibility of these organisations to ensure that everyone has access to safe, affordable and dignified housing. One aspect I'd like to touch on in particular is antisocial behaviour by one housing association tenant on another. This is often dealt with less effectively than ASB within either council blocks or private rental. The council needs to work with housing associations to ensure that these problems can be addressed and addressed quickly, as they really blight lives. There is a problem of accountability with housing associations. Many of them are large and their management structures and governance are just as complex as the council, without the presence of councillors inside the machine to lobby for vulnerable tenants. It's considered bad form to address an amendment before it's moved, but I'd just like to say in very general terms that I fear the Labour amendment lets housing associations off the hook. Yes, housing associations, like councils, are operating in a difficult financial environment and should receive more funding, but it's too easy to say it's all the government's fault. And we should recognise that some housing associations are not as well run as others and need more council assistance and engagement. Returning to our motion, we need to hold housing associations accountable for their actions and demand that they live up to their obligations to the people of Ealing. We need to advocate for policies that prioritise the needs of social tenants and the community. And we as a council need to work together with housing associations to find solutions to this crisis, to support their residents and ensure that all of them have decent roofs over their heads. Thank you. I beg to move the motion in my name.
Thank you. Councillor Basutis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to second the motion, please. Okay, thank you very much. Social housing providers and provides a vital lifeline for tenants who are struggling to afford open market rents, which have risen sharply over the past year. The majority of social housing in England is now managed by housing associations, which are in effect not-for-profit enterprises. We are fully aware of the contribution housing associations make to social housing provision in the borough and across the country. Many smaller housing associations do a good job in providing quality, affordable social housing to their tenants. However, many of the larger housing associations that I've had to deal with, I'm finding an increasing number of complaints, such as leaky bathrooms, leaky roofs, broken windows, unsecured doors, lifts not working, security cameras not in operation, unfinished flooring, ASB from neighbouring tenants, as Councillor Ball has mentioned, emails and phone calls not answered. And some of these issues have been going on for more than a year or two, even though there's been regular communication between all parties involved. The amendments in which the Labour Group propose, we don't disagree with some of the information. However, we feel it distracts from the main purpose of the motion. Over the past 8 years, I've been a councillor, fellow colleagues and I, and I'm sure some of you here in the chamber, I've had to deal with ever-increasing amounts of casework related to housing regarding housing associations. So out of frustration and as a last resort, residents come to us. I believe housing associations need to be much more accountable for the upkeep of their properties to local authorities than they currently are. I welcome the comments from Helen Baker, who is the chair of the housing charity Shelter and chair of the review on social housing, who says that there should be an urgent review to address problems of social housing in England. We need to address the power imbalance between tenants and housing providers. They need to be much more responsive to the tenants' complaints, and maintenance and antisocial issues needs to be carried out in a reasonable timeframe. So therefore, I hope you'll support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hellball, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to move the majority group's amendment to the opposition motion. I don't think anyone here would dispute that Britain's housing market is dysfunctional and that people are suffering as a result. 12 years of Tory government have pushed more people into the volatile private rented sector. Home ownership has dropped and social housing stock being depleted. But let's just recall how those 12 years started. They started with a coalition of both the parties opposite, and theirs was a government that shifted expenditure away from new development in the social sector and into the private sector via housing benefit. If anyone wants to know why councils and housing associations haven't been able to build enough social homes, that's why. They removed the capital subsidy for developing new social homes at social rent levels. They pushed people into the private rented sector and then reduced the benefit to cover their rent, consigning tenants to an ever-decreasing supply of the cheapest properties. They made housing and local government contribute more than their fair share towards deficit reduction by inflicting budget cuts in the first 4 years, equivalent in scale to the budgetary transitions immediately after 1945, when the UK government was withdrawing at speed from its war footing. One of the first things they did was to undermine the rights and voice of tenants by axing a number of bodies Labour had brought in to protect them. And now, belatedly and hypocritically, they want to reinstate them. They made local authorities' HRAs self-financing, yet continued to interfere in the business planning of all social landlords. The subsequent Tory government then inflicted 1% cuts on all social rents for 4 consecutive years, a move that has wiped 17.6 million so far from our own HRA in Ealing. This is the money that funds vital investment in our council homes and our capacity to replace and build new ones. Their cap for 23-24 will see a further 2 million disappear. So I won't be taking any lectures on housing from Tories or Lib Dems tonight. They are responsible for much of the misery facing tenants in both sectors today. Despite extreme challenges, we delivered over 2,500 genuinely affordable homes in the last 4-year term and aim to surpass that this term. We're also spending £400 million on improving our existing housing stock, and we're getting tougher on rogue landlords. We'll be strengthening tenants' rights and access to justice for people exploited by criminal landlords, and our recently extended private rented sector selective licensing scheme, which is set to be the largest of its kind in West London, will come into force next month. And last year, we published our tenancy strategy, asking housing associations to offer lifetime tenancies to their tenants. This demonstrates our continued commitment to tenants and to tackling poor property conditions. Madam Mayor, the Tory government cannot be let off the hook for what is a national crisis and must step up to the mark, recognise the damage they've caused, the suffering they've inflicted, and do much more to support social housing providers to build and maintain the affordable homes that a nation of people needs.
Thank you. Councillor Merno, please, only 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't cover all the issues that Councillor Walls covered, but I think it's really important that you look at the housing market as a whole. And I think both of you have looked at housing associations, but you may be misunderstanding how the housing market has moved over the last 10 years. Between 2008 and 9 and 2020 to 21, 19% of households are now in the private rented sector. That is the largest. The next largest is 17%, which is socially rented. And out of that, 7% is council housing and 10% is housing associations. And I would tell you, if you gave people a choice between living maybe whatever sort of difficulties they have in a housing association flat or in the private rented sector, I think every person in Ealing or in London would say, please, can we move into a housing association flat? The private rented sector is an absolute nightmare. Rents have risen enormously. We've got our private sector licensing scheme, which is expanding on January the 3rd to 15 wards. And now what we are going to do, hopefully, if the government gave us permission, was to do the whole of the borough and have rogue landlords licensed properly, providing proper services for our tenants. And I think that's where really our priority should be. Yes, we should work in partnership with the housing associations, but we can actually have some influence on them. We can work with them. We have regular meetings with them, and we can work with them. There is a process in place where, as Councillor Waller pointed out earlier, I did read in 2010, you got rid of the National Tenant Voice, your government. And then in 2012, you got rid of the Tenant Services Authority. And now you've got the regulator of social housing trying to claim that they want to bring back tenants associations in these housing associations to make sure that their voice is heard. It's your government that got rid of all the authorities that were there, all the organizations that were there to manage and try and put forward the voice of tenants in housing associations. But all you did was you get rid of them. And now when you've had a really unfortunate incident of a young boy dying because of mold, you now go back and start saying we should have more tenants' voices heard. We've always supported our tenants, but I really think it's important we look at the broken housing market that this government, you're together with the Tories, created since 2010, have distorted the housing market. Housing rents are out of control. Housing benefit is out of control. People can't afford to live, and that's your responsibility. And it's hypocritical to stand up now and claim that you somehow think that housing association tenants deserve services. Yes, they do. And we've always said that, but you have not covered yourselves in glory. Look at the wider market. Private tenants in the housing sector are really badly served, and we need to support them as well as all the rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stafford, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and I rise to support the original motion, unamended motion from the Liberal Democrats. I think the Liberal Democrats are correct in their assessment of the Labour amendment. The focus that Labour wants to put on the private rented sector is clearly a distraction from the motion. I'm surprised it even got through. Clearly, there are major issues in the private sector. But without the private sector, this council would not be able to cope. So for Councillor Manroe to demonise all private renters, I think is both unfair and a distraction from the point. And in fact, for far too long, Ealing Labour have given housing associations a free pass, and in doing so has let down residents in this borough. But it doesn't surprise me, given the council's own record on health and safety issues with its tenants. Only this year, in 2022, we've had both the register of the regulator of social housing and the housing ombudsman sanctioning this council for health and safety breaches and for not repairing a property for 6 years, which had damp caused by leaks. And as has been mentioned, now, if never, is the time we really must focus on this, given the death of that 2-year-old boy, which was utterly shocking in Rochdale, and we must ensure that it never happens anywhere, especially in our borough, if we can prevent it. I want to pick up on just 2 examples from our local area in Ealing, in Hanger Hill specifically. So Catalyst Housing manage properties on Hangerview Way. And earlier this year, or earlier in the autumn, in October, we were alerted to the fact there was significant substance cracking, cracks in the walls that were so large you could actually see in from one room to another. Residents in that housing association, in those buildings, have been writing to Catalyst to try and solve the problem. This wasn't a minor crack, this was structural damage. I wrote to the Catalyst Housing Association on the 21st of October. We are almost 3 months later, I have not had a response from councillors. This is the sort of problems that this council should be dealing with. But not only should they be dealing with the problems that residents are facing, they should also be standing up to those rogue housing associations that want to build in our borough. And Twyford Abbey, for example, is being built on permission was given by the planning committee here, a shameful decision, to allow Clarion to build on Twyford Abbey. Now, Clarion, again, has been sanctioned on numerous occasions by the Housing Ombudsman for severe maladministration because of leaks, because of damp, because of mold, because of pest control. Is this the sort of housing association that we want building and looking after tenants in this borough? I would say not. So I urge members in this chamber to support the original motion and that we can actually hold housing associations to account to the benefit of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brett, please.
Thank you. Just to say, Councillor Stafford, that little boy who's 2 years old was called Awab Isaac. So just for reference, that maybe next time when you're using him, you might use his actual name when you're using it in as part of a statement.
Point of order, Madam Mayor. I did not have permission of the parents to mention the boy's name, and I thought it would be inappropriate if the councillor is suggesting that in some way I am being offensive to that boy.
Yeah.
The implication that I was being offensive in some way was I categorically I did it out of respect not to mention his name because I had not spoken to the parents to do so.
Point of order, point of order, point of order.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, he knows that you make a personal statement at the end of somebody's speech. So Greg, in future, maybe you give way to people who are speaking.
Are you quite finished?
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So can my 3 minutes start now, please? Thank you. Right. So I'd like to say thank you to the opposition, the Liberal Democrats, for bringing this up. I'd also like to point out you probably brought it up with the wrong people. The Ealing Council isn't responsible for the housing crisis, and Ealing Council isn't responsible for the actions of our housing associations. That sits firmly with the government. I will bring up a few points around kind of the state of the housing market, which have already been spoken about. There are 1.2 million households on the social housing list in England, but only 6,051 homes for social rent were built last year. So let that deficit sink in. That number is massive. We've also got almost 135,000 social homes for rent that were either sold or demolished without being replaced. And that was between 2010 and 2021, again, under this government and the coalition government. And again, just to repeat what has already been said by Councillors Munro and Wall, under the coalition government, the ability for tenants to be able to engage with their landlords was taken away because two bodies were then disbanded. So again, you keep bringing it up to the council, but it's not the council's fault about what is going on here. So that's just a few samples of issues that are going on with the housing market right now. But in Ealing, what does that mean? Well, we've got over 11,000 on the waiting list, which is why we've got huge ambitions to provide more homes, affordable homes that you always oppose in every single planning committee. But we need those homes. We need to provide decent, affordable homes for people. And despite the circumstances that we have, we are managing it very slowly, but we are managing it. Right, sorry, I just lost my place now. And then just so whilst we acknowledge that landlords, both private and housing associations, absolutely need to do better. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. I'm standing up here and I'm supporting the amendments to the motion tonight. So let's take a step back and have a think about the wider picture on what is going on with the housing market right now. And it is not Ealing's Council's responsibility for having rogue landlords and dodgy associations. We work tirelessly with our tenants, tirelessly with other agencies to make sure that they provide a good service. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Desco, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to secondly the amendment proposed by Councillor Wall. I think we look at a bit of the history of housing associations starting in the early 13th century, would you believe, with almshouses. 19th century developed by Victorian philanthropy, Peabody, Guinness houses. We recognise those names. So there's a long tradition there. But the philanthropy of the government, when they said, as it mentioned in the amendment, that they were going to reduce rents by 1%, what was the real motive for that? Well, Councillor Wall mentioned that Ealing suffered a loss in income measured in the tens of millions. What they were really looking for in the national government was to save 1.4 billion in housing benefit. That's in the House of Commons library, saying 1.4 billion saved by the government by reducing social rents. Not philanthropy, not largesse, but that's what it was about. And the OBR, remember that organisation which the Conservatives set up, and they said this is what would show us good benefit, good fiscal rules, gave direct advice. Now, we know recently what problems caused by ignoring the OPR. At that time, that reduction in rent was put forward, they said that will have a detrimental impact on housing investment. And what happened? We're seeing the result of that. The motion mentioned about the Housing Act. Now, a couple of years ago, I was chairing a scrutiny committee, and the Conservative and Labour members on that committee will remember we looked at this to give it its full name, the Housing (Fitness for Human Habitation) 2018 Act was about improving housing standards. But we also heard at that scrutiny committee, we had no teeth about enforcement. So why bring it forward? The government recently started to have improved standards review. What did it do? It paused that review, put it on the burner, and we've got yet to see that act come to Parliament and be passed. The National Housing Federation didn't stand by. The Chartered Institute of Housing didn't stand by. And it might be helpful to know, but this very day, there's been a publication of a better social housing review this very day, because they didn't stand by and wait for legislation. They produced that. So Councillor Buttersill, if you're looking for some improvements, they've already published. They were published this very day because they got onto tenants. They had an independent panel. They got onto campaign groups. They spoke to front tenant-facing staff and found out where the problems were. And now there's a framework and a template to go by. So it's already there. So what you're calling for was printed and published today. Talk about timing. So I think this motion is well-intentioned, but it's wide of the mark about the context, the background, and the reality where we are in. So I think we need a bit of that, and we need a bit of a check by the Liberal Democrats about the history, about the Conservatives, about their continuous failure in the housing market to maintain standards and have proper enforcement. Can I ask you to support the amendment? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Grant, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just welcome Councillor Contis just arrived. I don't have very long. Madam Mayor, thank you very much. Yes, I support the motion, the original motion, because I think it's very focused, and I think it's a motion that comes out of experience, councillors visiting and seeing what's going on, and it's limited as it should be. I've visited lots of properties recently. I visited a property where with the property next door was a well, I won't name the name, but it was a housing association property, and the garden was completely overgrown, and it's taken 6 months to get this completely overgrown garden cleared. And I think probably all the councillors have had that experience as well. And actually, what I'd like to add, the motion, the original motion, could go a bit further and actually talk about gardens, and actually go a bit further than that, and try and bring in the idea of participation instead of treating tenants as them, bring them in as us, and trying to get tenants actually taking care and joining in the upkeep of properties. And I think that would be a great step forwards in this whole process of engagement. But of course, the amendment, such as it is, which actually ends up being longer than the original motion, it can't be supported. And it starts in the very beginning. Ealing Council notes many Ealing residents lived in rented properties or properties managed by housing associations. So it immediately starts to talk about all rented accommodation in Ealing, which is absolutely ridiculous because it's a multifarious and a huge problem. Talk about Councillor Monroe talking about private landlords and demonising private landlords, which is of course absolutely vital to Ealing's economy and the whole of Ealing's life. And you know perfectly well that there is not enough social housing. There is not enough social housing to be provided. Therefore, we are reliant on private sector, and we have and I pay tribute to Housing Solutions, who are constantly trying to find solutions for our residents in the private sector, and they always recommend that residents consider the private sector, as you well know. All right, so when you go along through this long-winded amendments, and probably written by several people, because there's about as much logic, well, there is no logic to it at all, you finally get to the point to reinstate organizations like the Tenant Services Authority and the National Tenant Voice. Well, the Tenant Services Authority was disbanded by the coalition in 2010 because it was a quango and because all it did was gather data, and we're not interested in government that wastes time. And the National Tenant Voice lasted for about 6 months after under Gordon Brown, and then was disbanded, as you well know, because it was ineffective. And there've been at least 2 iterations of that organization since, and now it's much better. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Rice, please.
So there I was, a student in a house share close to South Ealing Tube, and the landlord supposedly fixes the boiler. My housemate sticks a carbon monoxide reader on the wall, yet by the morning the boiler had sent the reader off the scale. Our university forces the landlord to get it sorted. Then years later, my husband and I are renting in Ealing Broadway, and the landlord refuses to make repairs to keep us safe. It is the present day, and my husband and I now own our own flat in Greenford. However, as leaseholders, we've been struggling with the dangerous cladding which covers our building and getting someone to take responsibility. The point, Madam Mayor, is that many Ealing residents live in homes which put their health at risk, and whether it is housing associations, private landlords or managing agents, surely everyone has a moral duty to those residents. There is certainly an argument for bringing people together, drawing greater strength as a collective to discuss the issues and getting the support of anyone with influence to help. It only got better for me when support was there and someone was accountable. Therefore, it is gobsmacking that the ability of tenants to engage with their landlords or social housing provider was slashed by the coalition government when they closed the Tenant Services Association and National Tenant Voice in 2010, stripping tenants of their ability to have a voice when it came to their homes. What my experiences highlight to me is that so much of our housing is not fit for purpose. And my goodness, isn't that yet another reason why we need to be building more housing and building it now? However, all it took was for some Tory backbenchers who went beyond NIMBYism, who appear to believe that others do not deserve a decent home, and Michael Gove waters down house building targets. Will it be any wonder when those Tory MPs who oppose house building leave the House of Commons in defeat at the next election? There are co-living developments designed for students and young professionals to find a temporary home, although it's not just the young who cannot afford to rent or buy. Even those in their 40s, 50s and older cannot afford a home of their own. The Guardian gave one example of a 65-year-old man who works at Tesco and who is house sharing with 4 men. His housemates are in their 40s and 50s, and they work as well. That is where we are. Even the middle-aged in full-time employment are trapped in HMOs. According to one flat sharing site, there has been a 239% increase in 55 to 64-year-olds looking for house shares since 2011. What hope is there for our young or for anyone? There are people these are people who should be living in well-maintained council housing. Council housing, council housing, council housing. At Labour Party conference, Lisa Nandy illustrated brilliantly how it is Labour who is on the side of Ealing residents.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Nand, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As we all know, the housing market is in the worst condition that any of us can remember, with the supply of affordable housing woefully unable to meet demand. Madam Mayor, housing associations could be doing much better if only they were not under financial constraints. The biggest barrier to their progression and improvement is funding. The underlying cause of this issue and central problem is the terrible lack of investment from the Tory government. Madam Mayor, local authorities, including Ealing, need investment from the government to deliver genuinely affordable housing. The state of the housing market is absolutely appalling. It causes real issues for our residents in their local communities, including socioeconomic inequality in their communities, weakening community cohesion and togetherness. Madam Mayor, the Tory government have not only failed to build genuinely affordable homes, but they have also single-handedly managed to lose them all at an alarming rate. With an average of 12,000 urgently needed homes a year, between 2010 and 2021, the Tory government have demolished or sold homes without being directly replaced. Madam Mayor, despite this, we have committed to delivering one of the most generous schemes for genuinely affordable housing across London. But we want to go even further to meet the demand of those 11,000 people that are still on our waiting list. However, we cannot do this without the vital government funding and resourcing we so desperately need. Madam Mayor, this administration takes the waiting list very, very seriously. And that is why we have acted despite the lack of government funding. From 2018 until now, we have built 2,700 genuinely affordable homes, which has helped us to reduce the number of families that are homeless. We took significant steps to ensure that people living in housing association properties and the private rented sector are further protected. Madam Mayor, therefore, we have increased the standards in the private rental sector by extending the private rented sector selective licensing scheme. Madam Mayor, the housing market should not be allowed to continue any longer in that state that it is in, which is why we are in dire need for a Labour government to step in and solve the crisis. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I do not support the Lib Dems motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Anand. Next is Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As my colleagues, Councillor Brett and Councillor Driscoll said, it was good to see the Liberal Democrats actually having a motion on housing, and we'd like to see more of them. But unfortunately, they sort of had a very narrow view here, and the Conservatives just don't want to admit that some of the mistakes the coalition government made all those years ago, removing ways of consulting tenants. We need tenants to be consulted, and then they can tell their landlords if things haven't been done. All of us know in this room there's a housing problem throughout the whole country, and we need all sorts of houses. I think people misunderstood what Councillor Manrose said. He didn't demonise all private landlords, because we know there's some very good private landlords, and we need everyone to work together to provide more housing in this borough. So I think people misheard him there. As I think Councillor Corrigan said earlier, some people have got a slight hearing problem tonight, but never mind. All of us together want there to be better housing, because we know children and young people need somewhere decent to live. We want families to be much happier, not to have issues like mold and damp. And of course, there are problems with buildings. We've all come across people complaining to us, and many of us in this room have had to go as far as the CEO of housing associations on occasions to actually get people to get back to us. But that's unfortunately because of the way things have been built and so on. So we do want the housing associations to have more power, to be able to put rents up. As Councillor Driscoll said, it was because they didn't want to pay the extra housing benefit. There's often reasons behind these things. So I fully support our amendment. I do want us all to work together, because we know how important the housing is. And I think it would be incumbent upon the Conservative group to contact the government and ask them what are they going to do about housing. And as it was mentioned by one of my colleagues, look at what Michael Gove has done. As Councillor Rice has said, he's backed down on the planning consent. So we do need a lot of work to be done, and I fully support the Labour amendment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Downey, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just perhaps round up, picking a few of the things that have been said. First of all, I must, like Councillor Johnson, jump to the defence of my colleague, Councillor Manro, who has been introduced, I think. He certainly didn't seek to disparage. I have a very good position here. I heard him before anyone else, and he did not criticise all local or private landlords or renters, as Councillor Stafford put it. And I think the point about the difference between the original motion and the motion as amended is, as Councillor Driscoll said, he used the word context. Without context, what we have here is a motion from the Liberal Democrats complaining that sometimes casework with housing associations is a bit difficult to resolve. Well, we've probably all got an experience like that, because the truth is, like everything else, everyone else, some housing associations are better than others, and some of them are better than others more of the time or less of the time. And the context in which they operate is critical. I was going to mention the Victorian precedents that Councillor Driscoll did. He did it more eloquently than I. The point is, they fill a void. Why are they here? They're here because there's a need. You know, why are people pushed to private housing? Why are they recommended private housing? Because it's better on the whole than homelessness. And if you can't get a council house, you can't get a social house, and you don't want to be homeless, you're kind of in private accommodation, Councillor Gallant. So without looking at the overall context of housing, without looking at the fact that a government which could seek to deal with it by building more houses, which could seek to deal with it by giving councils the opportunity to build more of our own accommodation, but chooses to do none of those things, partly because of incompetence and indolence, but partly because at root, it hates the notion of the state providing anything, hates the notion of the state providing secure, safe homes, hates the notion of the third sector being able to step in to fill the gap that government has increasingly left. So yes, we'll work, as the amendment says, to make better our arrangements with housing associations, to help those housing associations do better themselves. But the motion as unamended isn't worth the time of this chamber this evening, and I recommend the amendment to you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ball, please sum up now. Only 3 minutes.
Thank you. I won't take that long. We heard a lot about Tory government cuts and quite a bit about the dire state of the housing market as a whole. We heard about the council's own housing delivery. Embarrassingly, in the week when figures came out showing that 4,986 social rented homes have been demolished in Ealing since 2012, the highest in any London borough. We also heard about private rentals and even leasehold property. Councillor Munro said everyone would choose housing associations over private rented. I mean, it should be the case that housing associations are hugely better than private landlords, as housing associations exist to serve their residents. But in reality, I think today in Ealing, whether tenants would choose a housing association or a private landlord very much depends on the individual housing association or private landlord in question. I mean, it is odd. We had an argument about whether Councillor Munro was demonising or not, but I mean, I think it is odd that Labour councillors here think that all private landlords are rogue landlords when so many of them are private landlords. Councillor Brett said it's not our fault. I mean, I think nobody said that it was your fault. The motion isn't seeking to blame the council on failures of housing associations on the council. But I think that attitude is problematic. The logic is, if a housing association screws up, that's okay because it's not the council's fault. I thank the Conservative group for their support, and I hope that even if the amendment does get passed, I hope that the Cabinet will take the message to heart that by more work by the council with housing associations will hugely improve the lives of so many housing association tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. We have heard the debate and an amendments and motion has been moved and seconds. I will now go to the vote on the amendments. All those in favor, please. How many? I'm looking how many hands.
How many?
All those against. Any abstention? No. The amendment is therefore carried. I will now go to the vote on the motions. All those in favor, please. All those against? Any abstention? No. The motion is therefore carried. The next is majority group motions for debate. I call on Councillors Blacker to move the majority group's motion for debate, please, Mr. Blaker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I save some time?
It's 4 minutes for you.
Fantastic. Can I save some time at the end by accepting the Lib Dem amendment now? What I will say, though, however, is if you do like our manifesto so much you want to repeat its lines, then you need only vote for it at the next election. Madam Mayor, we all have stories about how wonderfully the NHS has served us, our loved ones, our friends, our family, shepherding us into this world, fixing us up when we fall over in it, and in some cases, stopping us leaving it too soon. But we are not here tonight to compete with each other in platitude and adoration, I'm afraid. Because the NHS we hold dear is teetering on the brink. The idea that it is there when we need it the most no longer holds true under the Tories. A record 7.2 million, up from when we published the motion, and a record 7.2 million people are now waiting for NHS treatment. And they're waiting for longer than ever before, often in pain and discomfort, and putting pressure on social services while they do so. 400,000 people have been waiting over a year to be seen, and over 2,000 have waited more than 2 years to be seen, let alone to be treated. The NHS says that 95% of A&E presentations should be seen within 4 hours, but in North West London, it's just 69%. And tragically, that is better than the national average. And locally, nearly 400 have had to wait more than 12 hours to be admitted. There have been more 12-hour waits this year than in the last 10 years combined. And thanks to the effect of inflation exacerbated by a disastrous Tory gamble with the economy earlier this year, the NHS is already facing a £7 billion shortfall in its budget. And the latest Prime Minister has been able to offer no respite for a chronically overstretched health and care service. It's no surprise that we are facing the greatest workforce crisis in the history of the NHS, with more than 133,000 vacancies, when 1 in 9 people in this country are awaiting treatment. That is, to coin a phrase, a disgrace. But I'm sure there'll be a defence of the government from over there this evening. They'll blame the pandemic backlog. Don't let them fool you. Waiting times were a record high even before COVID struck. They'll point to more money, but what was released in the autumn statement won't even cover half of this year's deficit. And if they're feeling really desperate, Madam Mayor, they'll try and blame the staff. The very healthcare workers they wanted us to clap for 2 years ago, but now they won't even meet them to negotiate on pay. Hospitals have food banks for their staff, handing out welfare packages. And there are even reports of staff sleeping in their cars because they can't afford the fuel to and from work. The Royal College of Nursing is going on strike for the first time in its 106-year history this month because they simply cannot take any more. The last shift survey report found that 8 in 10 shifts were unsafe. 83% of nursing staff said that staffing levels in the last shift were not sufficient to meet all patients' needs safely and effectively. An experienced nurse's salary has fallen 20% in real terms since 2010. But what else has happened since 2010? Quite simply, Tory government has happened. Our NHS remains understaffed and overstretched as a direct result of 12 years of Conservative mismanagement. Everybody's having to pay more, but is getting less. In contrast, Labour has set out a 10-year plan to fix the toxic Tory legacy of mismanagement, funded not by working people, but by ending the non-dom tax loophole. Our residents deserve a better approach. Our residents deserve a government that will fix this crisis. And most of all, our residents deserve a Labour government.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I formally second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Councillor State, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, thanks to Councillor Blacker for accepting our amendment. I must admit, I found it almost unbelievable that Labour wouldn't have accepted our amendment, but nonetheless, we're grateful that he has. He came out of a plethora of statistics as to the dire state of the National Health Service, and there's little point in me or anybody else actually for that matter repeating some of those statistics. All I would like to just spare a moment in referring to issue to do with mental health. So I've got some statistics as well, but I can find my notes, which of course I can't. Never mind. Can I also refer actually to the significance of some of the mental health statistics, which came up in the HAS meeting, with Health and Adult Social Services meeting earlier this month. There were many very, very good interventions from councillors in this room, particularly, in fact, from Councillor Conti, describing his own experiences of dealing with patients with mental health problems. And it was a very heartfelt intervention, stressing the fact that locally people feel that there are no mental health facilities for them to use. I think if I paraphrase him, is the message that he was trying to get across. Against that background, it's not surprising, and I will quote some statistics which I've now found from the Samaritans to begin with, that in 2021, 5,219 people committed suicide in England, 10.5 per 100,000. And as I suspect most of us are aware, that the figures between the number of males who commit suicide and females are quite dramatically different. So males, it's 15.8 per 100,000, and for women, it's 5.5 per 100,000. Other figures from the Nuffield Institute. In our motion, we mentioned that 1 in 4 people experience a common mental disorder, and I'm sure most of us in this room will know people who will suffer from mental disorders such as depression such as anxiety. But you move on from some of those figures, and in 1 in 6 children in 2020, the leading cause of death for people aged 5 to 34 was unintentional self-harm. So all these different levels of mental health issues, be they relatively less serious, be it some aspects of depression and anxiety, culminating in these awful rates of suicide. As it happens, I understand that the levels of suicide in the UK compare relatively favourably to services, to similar figures in Europe. But even so, mental health has always been regarded as the less important of the illnesses that people suffer. And I appreciate and thank Councillor Blacker for accepting our amendment to highlight those issues.
Thank you. Councillor Milton, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I formally second the amendment. Is it okay if I speak now rather than waiting for later? Okay, thank you. It seems a long time ago when the A&E wards were threatened with closure in Ealing, Charing Cross and many others across our neighbouring boroughs. I recall there were two parties there who were steadfastly fighting for all of those 8 A&Es. There was the Labour Party to the right and ourselves here to the left. The Conservatives started off for about a year or so campaigning with us, and it looked like there was a more joint forces there. But then soon enough, they dropped off that particular tough fight that they didn't want to be involved in. And so I think that the issue there was that when leadership was needed then, only 2 of the 3 parties decided to do that. The leader then of the opposition, he had the chance to sign a letter with all the 3 leaders, and he refused to sign it, and that shows something. The announcement in March 2019, when Ealing and Charing Cross A&Es were saved, was amazing for those patients and those people campaigning there for many years. But sadly, we're left, as Councillor Blacker detailed, with a large array of stats that the NHS is suffering now and is likely to be in decline for some time unless there are major changes in the next few years. We need to invest in our health service and not allow it to degrade. The proverb, prevention is better than the cure, should always be followed in these cases. People find it difficult to get a GP appointment, sometimes within days. People are waiting too long when they spot potential cancers or issues that they think are very serious and need some reassurance and getting those treated. Or when they wait for an ambulance, it doesn't arrive quickly enough. And then many people take the view that they'll wait and see if their condition gets better. And then, of course, when it does get worse, it may be too late for those who suffer from cancer or similar illnesses like that. And that is one of the reasons why Councillor Steed referred to mental health, which is often treated as the poorer sister of the physical and mental health, because there are so many people suffering, and the real truth of how many people suffer is a lot higher than many of the statistics that we can see or read. I think patients do need a legal entitlement to a GP within 7 or so days, and the Lib Dems want to do that and extend that 24-hour guarantee to those in real urgent care. So, Madam Mayor, the NHS is again at risk, as many years of this current government, and this country needs to get rid of that sore that is in government, and hopefully we can be replaced with a party or parties that can improve the NHS, not degrade it.
Very much. Councillor Raza, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There can be no doubt that the NHS is in crisis. Every day we wake up with stories with delays in getting GP appointments or an ambulance or entry into an A&E unit from the back of an ambulance, which all confirm devastating impact of the Conservatives' neglect of our NHS. Patients deserve so much better than this. The government and everyone who works in the NHS deserve so much more than this government for the invaluable work that they do. The Conservatives have spent 12 years running our NHS into the ground and letting our economy fall further and further behind. But make no mistake, this is not inevitable. No one should have to wait more than 12 hours for an emergency case visit, let alone 30,000 people. Our dedicated workers should not have to work unsafe hours without adequate pay that fails time and time again to keep up with the rate of inflation. And our healthcare workers should not have to decide between providing life-saving care and fighting the government for a decent living wage. These failures to our NHS and residents are a direct result of 12 years of a Conservative mismanagement. And they pose a risk not just to our NHS, but to our communities and our relationship with the NHS with them. As we all sadly know, waiting time inequality, staffing inequality, and pay inequality disproportionately affects our most vulnerable communities. And these Tory failures exacerbate the further health inequalities that already blight so many in our communities. As Ealing Labour, we are working hard to address this crisis, during which this will be an extremely difficult winter. We will continue to defend Ealing Hospital, continue to defend our accidents and emergency department, oppose further cuts and closures of acute services, and demand the government gives the NHS the resources it needs to clear the huge and record waiting list dating back from before the pandemic, as well as timely access to GP appointments. But what we really need, Madam Mayor, is a Labour government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Radha. Councillor Mohammed, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I am heartbroken when I read stories about worryingly long and dangerous delays in getting an operation, a hospital bed, a GP appointment, an ambulance, or an entry to A&E from the back of an ambulance. After 12 years of mismanagement, the Conservative are badly letting patients down. And when I say patient, I mean the 7.2 million patient, as highlighted my colleague, Councillor Plecker, patients waiting for hospital appointments and their families. What cost do these delays have to patients and their families? The anxiety, the misery, the risk that this number represents is simply unfathomable. And in Ealing, we are feeling the effects. 372 people locally recently had to wait more than 12 hours to be admitted to accident and emergency. Just 73 of patients admitted to A&E in Northwest London were seen within 4 hours. But the NHS says 95% of patients should be admitted, transferred, or discharged in that time. I'm confident that our NHS staff in Ealing are going above and beyond to prepare this winter, but it is clear that the service is at breaking point. I love our NHS, but it has suffered badly from a decade of neglect from the Conservative government. The government blames the NHS delays on COVID, but these delays existed long before the pandemic did. A recent report from the King's Fund was unwavering in its assessment of what has gone wrong in the NHS. It said, and I quote, "This is not a COVID problem. This is an austerity problem. After years of managed decline, the government have offered the NHS nothing." The autumn statement doesn't even cover half of the deficit and offers no respite for a chronically overstretched health and care services. And now, for the first time ever, our hardworking nurses are striking after the government are refusing to even discuss a pay. But it doesn't need to be this way. Ealing Labour saved our A&E in 2019. And as outlined in Council Plan, after saving Ealing A&E, we will continue to defend Ealing Hospital and our accident and emergency department. We are also committed to opposing further cuts and closures of acute services, and we will demand the government gives the NHS the resources it needs to clear huge record waiting lists dating from before the pandemic. We are at Ealing Labour are doing all we can, but we need a Labour government. A Labour government created our NHS, and we will make an NHS fit for future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Councillor Conti, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think obviously we've heard tonight about all the pressures that are facing the NHS, and I don't think any way it's ever acceptable that someone's waiting many hours more than they need for an ambulance, or waiting 12 hours or more for a hospital bed in A&E, or the 7 million people waiting for outpatient appointments or operations. And, you know, in difficulties getting hospital GP appointments, even though there was a record 36 million GP appointments in October, and many patients still feel that they can't get access. Now, obviously, this is a problem that we all feel, both as patients ourselves and when we see our family, our friends and residents who contact us. Now, obviously, this isn't just an exclusive issue just in England alone. Labour-run NHS Wales is suffering similar problems. And in Wales, you're more likely than in England to be waiting for an outpatient appointment. There are more people on waiting lists, and you're more likely to wait longer for an ambulance. In fact, in Wales, since 2012, not a single month has the 4-hour target been met. So these challenges are large and they require a response. And obviously there's comments been made this evening about the amount of money that was in the autumn statement, but investment is going in. And at Health Scrutiny last week, we heard about the investment going into Ealing Hospital. So, for example, in the last couple of years, 27.7 million pounds of additional investment, with an additional 15 million pounds of investment in the next 12 months. You know, next year, a new community diagnostic centre. So the exact thing to try and help bring down those waiting lists. There's going to be 4 new ultrasound machines, 2 new CT scanners, 2 new MRIs, a DEXA scan, phlebotomy services, cardiology, respiratory services, all new services going in to Ealing Hospital next year. Now, obviously, that is addition. You know, clearly there's a long way to go to get the waiting list down, and more reform and more changes are going to be needed. A few weeks ago on LBC, Wes Streeting was being interviewed. And one of the things he said, which I agreed with, was that more money going into a 20th century healthcare system in the 21st century can't always be the solution. And obviously reform is going to be needed going forward. You know, we often talk about fixing the NHS, and we don't talk enough about how we make our nation healthier. And actually, if we want to think about getting more people back into work and growing our economy, the 2.5 million people on long-term sick, and improving their outcomes, I think we need to think about the other things about how the governments and different departments and local authorities can work across departments, whether it's housing, education, schools, and health, and the workforce, to ensure that people are healthier and less reliant on the health service going forward in the future, so that it's fit for the challenges ahead. So like I said at the start, I think that there is no doubt there is pressure. I think the government are taking steps. We've seen investment locally, but clearly there is obviously more to do moving forward. Thank you.
Councillor Rai, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not going to look at numbers at the moment, but I'd like to focus on someone who was close to me, who suffered a major heart attack 30 years ago. With all the agencies and 3 hospitals involved, they saved his life. This patient was given exceptional care, the very best medication and surgery, regardless of cost. All the services were joined up, and it was their professionalism and care that enabled this patient to make a full recovery from near death. In reality, this support from the NHS translated into this person being able to return to work and earn a living, make a contribution to the economic health of this nation through taxes, raise and support his own children, and keep his family together, who in turn continue to contribute positively to society. Madam Mayor, the NHS kept this family together. It kept this family independent. And in doing so, the NHS made a major contribution on so many levels, making them non-reliant on others. So, Madam Mayor, in my view, the government is clearly underestimating the impact the NHS makes on people's individual lives and its contribution to the well-being of our society on all these different levels. Sadly, 30 years on, the same patient has had to wait more than 12 months to see a consultant for a crippling disease that he'll never recover from. They're unable to offer him support with a specialist nurse because he literally lives on the wrong side of the borough boundary. What we're witnessing here is the end of a fluid NHS where the patient journey was smooth and the patient could access the right care at the right time and in the right place. Instead, the journey is now unsteady, with taps being turned on and off along the way. due to lack of staff. We spend the lowest proportion of our GDP on health in comparison to neighbouring countries. We have the lowest doctor-patient ratio. It's no wonder that doctors can't take a holistic approach to patient care and find themselves restricted to one symptom per patient. And I've never heard anything so ridiculous. That's not the solution to a shortage of 5,000 GPs. This approach stops prevention and stacks up long-term, more serious and costly demand on the NHS. I no longer wish to see cyclical solutions to recruitment problems. Let's just remind ourselves that it takes 7 years to train as a doctor, a further 7 years to specialize, and after 14 years of training, 50% of them never practice. Why? Because there are no incentives or appreciation from the Tory government for what they do. And since Brexit, European doctors don't want to work here, so that's added to the shortage. The NHS has been torn apart through deliberate fragmentation by the Tories.
Time, right, please.
That's why there's little, if any, cohesion through the patient journey. This government has already pressed the destruction button for the NHS through privatisation, which isn't delivering. And in doing so, Madam Mayor, it's widening health inequalities that we can't afford.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Weston, please. Very good.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I rise to support Labour's motion on NHS waiting times. It's beyond belief that nearly 400 people here in Ealing had to wait 12 hours to be admitted to our accident and emergency department. And it seems that these kind of wait times have become the new normal for local people. In what way is that acceptable? Now, we know there are workforce problems in every part of health and social care and in every corner of our country. Whether it's GPs in accident and emergency, health visiting, midwifery or nursing, every single part of our NHS seems to be overstretched and understaffed. And unless we have the right staff in the right places, we won't be able to give patients the timely access to care that they deserve. Labour's plan nationally is for the biggest expansion of the NHS workforce in history, which will see 7,500 more doctors a year, 10,000 more nurses and midwives every year, double the number of our district nurses a year, and 5,000 more health visitors. It would be paid for by abolishing the non-dom tax status, because unlike the Conservatives, we believe people living in Britain who make their home here should pay their taxes here too. Day to day, what matters most to people across Ealing is access to a GP, and too many of them are struggling to get appointments. The current Tory Health Secretary is invisible, hiding away from the underpaid nurses during the NHS winter crisis. The height of their ambition is for people to see their GP within 2 weeks. I say patients deserve so much better than that. The Labour Party has higher standards for patients, and the last Labour government guaranteed appointments within 2 days. We must do so again. And what of the NHS itself? Nurses, doctors, and healthcare staff have been asked to go the extra mile time and time again. Despite cuts and pressures, they have risen to these challenges. NHS digital figures show that at least 400 staff a week in England are leaving to improve their work-life balance. And can you blame them? The government refusing to negotiate with nurses over their below-inflation pay offer is the ultimate kick in the teeth. The same Conservative government that told us to clap for nurses on our doorsteps now sits by as the same nurses are forced to choose between heating and eating. The longer the Tories are in power, the longer patients will wait. Only a Labour government can be trusted with our NHS.
Thank you. Thank you. In time, you finish it. Thank you. Councillor Mahfouz, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to start my speech by talking about something that I must warn everyone will upset some people. I'm going to be using the C word this evening. It's difficult to talk about, but it's something that affects far too many people. The C word, of course, Madam Mayor, is cancer. It's a killer. And whilst I don't wish it on anyone in this room, I'm just about to deliver what might be a very difficult truth for everyone here. I want everyone in the chamber right now to look at the person next to you. Come on, look at the person next to you. The sad reality is that you or the person that you're looking at is likely to be diagnosed with cancer in your lifetime. That's because the sad reality, Madam Mayor, is that half, that's right, half of us will be diagnosed with cancer in our lifetimes. We almost certainly all know someone who we've loved who has had cancer, or worse, someone we've lost to cancer. And ask any professional, Madam Mayor, and they will tell you that early diagnosis is the best chance of tackling it. That's why I was so proud that the last Labour government didn't have a 2-week promise about seeing a GP. It was a 2-week promise from the moment you saw your GP to getting a diagnosis about that cancer. 2 weeks to get your critical diagnosis tests done from the moment you had that life-changing referral from the GP. That guarantee, Madam Mayor, was the difference between life or death for so many people. So, Madam Mayor, you can imagine my horror when the incoming Tory Lib Dem government of 2010 felt it wasn't a promise worth keeping. I was told by the now Baroness Bray that I was scaremongering by warning people that they risked giving up this life-saving 2-week guarantee by voting Tory back in 2010. But the all too sad reality is that that has now materialised. That guarantee out of the window, waiting times for diagnosis far too long. Madam Mayor, whilst I'm not afraid of using the C word, I'm afraid of the C word. I'm not afraid of talking about it and what we need to do to tackle it. And perhaps, you know, there's a new Prime Minister, there's a new Health Secretary. Maybe they're serious about tackling cancer too. I'm not going to quote a politician. I'm going to quote the CEO of Cancer Research UK, who recently wrote an article on the subject. She was referring to the 20th anniversary of Cancer Research UK being set up on the February. So flashback to February the 4th, on that date, the then Secretary of State and Health and Social Care Minister, Sajid Javid, declared a war on cancer, committed to publish a 10-year plan, which promised to focus on research and innovation, boost the cancer workforce, and tackle inequalities. 9 months and 2 governments later, and we have no sign of strategy, plan or funding. Neither Steve Barclay nor Rishi Sunak have uttered even a word about it. Madam Mayor, this government couldn't give it the time of day. I heard the thing go off, so I'll look to wrap up. Look, reality is that we need a health service that's there when you need it, not when you can afford it, which is all too often the case for many Tory ministers and their mates. And in reality, Madam Mayor, is that the NHS under the Conservatives is an NHS on life support. Only Labour will nurse the NHS back to the good state of health it needs to be in. Madam Mayor, our families, our friends, those we love and care about, our residents deserve an NHS that is there for them at the time of need. And I call on colleagues to support this motion.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you. Thank you. Very nice. Make me scared. Next is Bucklini, please.
Madam Mayor, I am angry. I am angry that the Tories continue to lie about their future plans, misleading the public on their plans for the NHS. I am angry that the Rishi government did not only pick pockets and purses of working people, but picked on our hospitals, doctors and nurses. I am angry that there is a huge shortage of doctors and nurses, that patients have to wait for longer hours at A&E and wait even longer and longer for specialist appointments, where 1 in 9 people in England is on the NHS waiting list. I am angry that people are seriously worried about getting ill and don't have the confidence that an ambulance would arrive before it is too late. Madam Mayor, I was speaking to a nurse at Ealing Hospital the other day. Let me tell you what she told me in her own words. The cost of living crisis and the lack of rising wages has made it very difficult for my partner and I to start our own family. As a nurse, I am stressed and worn out, having to do the work of two people. And at the same time, I am anxious about how I am going to pay my bills and put food on the table with such a low income. This is the worst I've ever experienced in my career. I just can't cope anymore. Madam Mayor, I couldn't help but feel moved by her story, which reflects the lives of tens of thousands of nurses in England. Just like her, working day and night to help look after the people we care about. Madam Mayor, after over a decade of Tory government who have done nothing but fail our hospitals, fail our nurses, and fail our patients, it is clear now that the longer they stay in power, the longer the NHS will suffer. This is why we need a Labour government who will put patients first, have more doctors and more nurses, all funded by abolishing the non-dom tax, the non-dom tax status that will raise more than £3.2 billion a year. It is time to put NHS first. It is time for a Labour government. Madam Mayor, I support this motion.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Glenn, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I really appreciate members, the sobriety and the intensity of the debate tonight. It's very helpful and across the chamber, especially from Councillor Mahfouz. Thank you very much. What I would say is that you see this small plaster on my hand at a routine visit to the doctor, and I was immediately offered a test for prostate cancer. This will examine and quickly ascertain whether it's true. And this, I haven't actually had the results or anything like that. But you see, that's medical culture today. It's about prevention. And I think that is a vast improvement on what it's been. There can be no complacency, as my friend, Councillor Conti says, there can no complacency about waits. We're not trying to defend that. Of course, having to wait 12 hours in accident emergency, it's simply not good enough. And we all know that. But perhaps we need to think more widely about what can be done. Money has increased, spend has increased. As we all know, it's 165 billion spent on the NHS today. That's up from 116 in 2010. I could go on. Doctors up by 35%, nurses numbers up by 15%. The vaccination rollout program, 94% of the population vaccinated, which was ahead of the rest of Europe, as we know. And we come to Ealing itself, 3 new MRI machines. I mean, they are vastly expensive, but they will be there, and a new diagnostic center. So, there are improvements. It can never be enough, and we all must try to make it better. Just listening to the Shadow Health Secretary the other day, 2 occasions actually, one on the Andrew Marr show, where he did say that it's not just a question of spending money, it's also a question of thinking about how we can reform the NHS and rebuild the NHS, which we must do. And listening to him on the Koonsberg show, where he hinted at a creative dialogue with the private sector. And if I said that, Lord Gallant of Gafford, as the leader likes to refer to, if I said that, well, you know very well, you'd be up in arms. But that wasn't me. That was Wes Streeting, and who I have a lot of time for, actually, who has, as we know, suffered himself from cancer. What I'd just like to say is that it's not this sort of angry motion here is not what it's about. It's about everybody rethinking and thinking anew about what the NHS can be, and what a great thing it can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shaw, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, from this side of the chamber, it's very simple. Everybody knows the political mantra. You can't trust the Tories with the NHS. The crocodile tears that are being cried on the far side and the objections from both opposition parties in this chamber are actually a blatant denial of the chaos that their parties have been responsible for while in government. Years of chronic underfunding, attempts at privatisation by stealth under the TTIP deal with America, broken promises of no more top-down NHS reorganisations. This side of the chamber remembers the Shaping a Healthier Future plan. the downgrading of Ealing Hospital, all the things that Councillor Conti said are coming back into Ealing Hospital, which of course are welcome, were things that were moved out a number of years ago under that very consultation process. We remember on this side the removal of the £10,000 bursary for the nurses. Student nurses, the applications for student nurses because of this and the training places was reduced hugely and is contributing to today's HR crisis that Councillor Blacker outlined. And all this is from the government of the Tories, propped up by the Liberal Democrats in exchange for their brief taste of power. And I hope they think that it was worth it now. Years of Tory government has created an NHS already at breaking point prior to the COVID pandemic, record waiting lists and staff shortages of over 100,000. Add the COVID pandemic on top of this, and the NHS wasn't and isn't in any position to cope. Overworked and overstretched staff are doing their level best, but morale is understandably, tragically low. This has led the nurses to take the unprecedented action of voting to strike. I asked a member of my family who's been a nurse and has experience of over 25 years working for the NHS, "Did you vote to strike?" "Yes," she said, "I did." "Then why?" I asked her. She said, "Look, the pay and the cost of living crisis is one thing, but it's the chronic deterioration in the working conditions that I've seen over the years. And the real concerns I have over the patient safety that is driving my vote to strike." The government's reaction to this strike by the nurses? To refuse to even discuss a pay deal. Only today it was revealed to start to train the military to drive ambulances and to ask patients to get to hospital in taxis. Winter is coming for the NHS, and not in an apocryphal Game of Thrones and George Martin type way, but it has arrived already and has been with us for some time. It's been brought about by the blue-eyed walking dead of the Tories, who've been attacking the institution for far too long. The crisis in the NHS is all too real, and it's too real now for our Ealing residents. It's one that's been created by the Tory government and that's painfully familiar for all of us who remember the Tory government and the NHS in the 80s and 90s. I'll be voting for this motion, Madam Mayor, because I'll be voting to support the NHS, support striking nurses, and support all Ealing residents who need it. Because everybody knows you can't trust the Tories with the NHS.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Sturtman, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. And I just draw members' attention to my employment in the Register, which isn't a pecuniary interest, but I work for NHS England. I thought that was uncharacteristically uncharitable speech from Councillor Shaw. I think the tone of the debate today has actually been much more considered than what we heard from him just now. I always find it interesting whenever we discuss the NHS in this chamber that actually, in terms of the speakers this evening, it's only two Conservatives who work in the NHS speaking on this. It's only two Conservative speakers who've actually worked in an A&E on the front line. It's only two Conservative speakers this evening. It's only the two Conservative speakers who are currently working. He doesn't work for the NHS. Yes, I know who you work for. You don't work for the NHS. The point being, it might be useful for Labour members to actually listen to those people who are working in the NHS at this very moment. And I think the reality is, I'm not blaming COVID, but the reality of COVID has knocked the NHS significantly. Councillor Moffa's talked very, very eloquently about cancer and cancer waiting times. And the simple reality is that during the lockdown, thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of cancer patients were not able to get diagnosed. And we are not even seeing, I would say, the first drops of what impact that will have. So we've got to be really, really careful when we talk about these things. And, you know, we've all, as Councillor Mahfouz says, know someone or have had experience of cancer. And I just note that Baroness Cootie, who some of you may know as Councillor Philippa Rowe, who was the leader of Westminster Council for 5 years, died yesterday of cancer. So, you know, people very close to home have been hit by it. What I don't accept from the Labour side is the idea that the government, A, doesn't care, and B, is doing nothing about it. The reality is that millions, billions of extra pounds are being poured into the NHS. I am really proud that the work that I'm doing in the NHS, supporting the elective recovery task force, which the Secretary of State set up last week, bringing down waiting times, improving healthcare, is something that we as a Conservative government are tackling. And I think the tone of the debate today has generally been very considered. And I think we all want to work both at a national level, but also I think more importantly here in this chamber at a local level to improve the healthcare outcomes of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have to say the sort of the sobriety of the debates that Councillor Gallant has so wonderfully said that we've managed to hold ourselves in this debate seems to have been broken actually by Councillor Stafford, because of course we've got plenty of people who work in the NHS, both on these benches, those who've either worked in the NHS or right now or in the past. In fact, we've got a general practitioner and we've got a mental health nurse who aren't here today because what are they doing? They're working in the NHS. Now, I'm certain that Councillor Conti, as a GP, of course, also works in the NHS and does shift work. And that's the nature of that. I think, Councillor Stafford, one needs to examine oneself before casting aspersions. And I have to say, you know, it's so interesting, isn't it, when we hear the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, not just on this debate, but also the sort of the complete absence of their own conscious or even their own memory. And it would be sort of churlish to make some sort of pot shot on the basis that the waiting times for memory clinics in this borough are something like 17 weeks, that there are over 530,000 people waiting for ear, nose and throat treatment. So we could say that Councillor Conti and Councillor Murtaza could get out their scripts right now and issue referrals to Councillor Malcolm, to Councillor Ball and to Councillor Stafford. But they, like so many hundreds of thousands of people in North West London that have some of the highest waiting lists in England, would face the challenges that we know that they face. And why? This isn't COVID. There weren't 100,000 empty vacancies after COVID. They were there before then. We have a dearth of doctors and nurses in our NHS. And in London, 28% of the NHS workforce come from overseas. And we know the hostile environment and the restrictive immigration policies, the drumbeating against Europe that the party opposite have operated for so many years, when actually our NHS in London and beyond is built by people of colour from different nationalities, all coming to this place to make sure that we are able to live happy and healthy lives. We know that the Tories have failed on the NHS. Two top-down reorganisations of the NHS. The first that asked GPs to come out of their general practice surgeries and engage in management. And now they've gone back full circle, getting NHS managers like Councillor Stafford to literally shovel money at a problem because they've had 12 years of failure. 12 years of not being able to keep people out of hospital and 12 years of not being able to keep the people who've discharged from hospital in their own homes. 12 years of failure under a Tory government. They didn't get it right, Greg, the first time. They didn't get it right the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth, the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th. It's going to take a Labour government for us to fix the NHS crisis that we now face.
Okay.
And I think they're so deflated because they know it.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Councillor Blake, please sum up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to everyone for contributing, particularly to those personal stories that illustrate the impact of the Tory failures on individuals, the nurses who are voting for strikes, the patients who haven't been able to be seen in time, and so on. They really do illustrate the impact. But it is frustrating to listen to the Conservatives, because on the one hand, apart from Councillor Stafford, who believes you can just throw money at things, Councillor Conti is much cleverer, and he knows that you cannot just throw money at the problem, and that reform is, of course, needed. They accept to some extent the diagnosis. They agree with this. They cannot disagree because the numbers do not lie. The 7.2 million people really are waiting for treatment. But they cannot see beyond the diagnosis to the root cause. And they abstract that, of course, reform is needed. Well, of course, I agree with Wes Streeting, because of course, reform is always reform is needed. Of course. Forgetting that it is only needed after 12 years of Tory government because of 12 years of Tory government. That all the problems they can see are there because of the two failed top-down reorganisations of the NHS that the Tory government have instituted, failed to implement properly, and then had to undo and redo, and so on the cycle will go. So do listen to each other. But let's go back to Councillor Glant's point, because I absolutely agree with him about prevention. And the best prevention in this instance, to prevent the NHS from getting to this state again, to prevent the problems recurring, is a Labour government and voting for this motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Now, so we have heard the debate and the motions has been moved and second. The amendments has been accepted by the mover and seconder of the motion. We will now go to the vote on the motion as amended. All those in the favor, please. All those against? Abstentions, please. The motion is therefore carried. Motions are not for debate now. We have received two motions not for debate tonight. Amendments have been received for the both of them, which have been accepted by the mover and the second. I can therefore go straight to the vote on both of the motions, not for the debate. So for the first motion, not we debate, all those in favor. All those against? Any abstention? The motion is therefore carried. Now we have the second motion, now not we debate. All those in favor. All those against? Any abstention? The motion is therefore carried. The Treasury Management Mid-Years Update 2022-23. Are the recommendations noted? Thank you. Appointment to the committees and other bodies. Are the appointments agreed? Urgent key decision exempted from call-in. There were no urgent key decisions exempted from call-in since the last council meeting.